but we're going to start with Husker women's hoops and voice of Nebraska women's basketball, Matt Coatney, after a stomping of Northwestern to close out the regular season. Matt, how are you doing this morning?
Oh, it's March Madness. That's always my favorite time of the year. The weather's warm. It hasn't started snowing yet. Let's do it. I love this time of year.
Well, we got the bracket for the Big Ten tournament, and I want to take a peek at that. But first, just that game in Evanston to close out the regular season after you had the comeback win to get to overtime against Oregon, the Washington game, and then Northwestern to close it out. Just how do you feel the momentum is for this team closing out the regular season that way?
Well, I think you said the correct word there, momentum. Nebraska needed it after the two games that Britt Prince missed. Getting her back was key heading into the Big Ten tournament. She missed 2 games with the ankle injury, suffered very late in the loss at Illinois. And it was a feel-good win. Nebraska needed some positive momentum. Their offense looked as good as it's looked all year with Britt Prince in the lineup, and just a monster effort by Alexis Markowski, who is playing her best basketball of her exceptional career at the end of her senior year. So it was a feel-good win, no doubt about it, and what Nebraska needed heading into March Madness.
Yeah, Matt, before we get to the first half that this team had and what they needed to against a team like Northwestern, you mentioned Britt Prince. She's out for a little bit. I even mentioned this last week that I was hoping maybe she had missed even the most recent game, more of a precautionary measure, but you're watching her get back in the flow of things. Did it seem like she, as far as her overall physical health, her wind, all of those things, when you do have a brief layoff, was all of that seemingly good and feeling good about the postseason now?
If I didn't know anything had happened to her, I wouldn't have known there was ever a problem. She moved very quickly. She was in passing lanes. She attacked off the bounce without any hesitation. Her push step and her lateral movement was exceptional. So I actually thought it was great to get her back in the lineup so Nebraska knew what they had, and she, I think, is 100% ready to move forward.
You've dealt with and seen this team deal with injuries all season. Britt ultimately missing just a couple of games, but you saw Allison Widener go down earlier in the year, and Natalie Potts, and Amy Williams has had to go through and kind of shuffle this lineup at different times based on availability. But you didn't have to worry about Alexis Markowski, like you said, playing some of her best basketball. 35 points against Oregon, makes several threes, has 19 points in the first half against Washington before tweaking her back, and then 30 points yesterday. How much has Alexis, one, just both grown because she's had to and she's a senior, but also under the conditions of the team at the end of this season is not the team that you were hoping that they would have all of those pieces there from the beginning of the season?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think if you take a look at the timeline, the offense that Amy Williams hoped to have this year would have Natalie Potts and Alexis Markowski as their bigs. And that only happened for 4 games. And then Nebraska needed to learn how to play without Natalie Potts, which is, you're a different team. But you also have a freshman point guard as good as Britt Prince is, who's learning how to get the ball to Alexis Markowski, when to deliver it, and in what are the best situations. And they developed some of that over the summer, developed that with Potts in the lineup. Not only do you lose Potts, now you have a freshman learning how to play with Markowski. And I think it's all kind of coming together at the right time in late February and early March. But Markowski has certainly put this team on her back, and she knows that the clock is ticking on her college career. And I think what we're seeing is a woman who is trying to maximize every second that she has remaining.
Coat, man, I want to talk about that game again yesterday because you have a Northwestern team. They've had minimal success, but it's a team that is going to throw everything out there. It's senior day for them as well. That can be an uncomfortable situation, especially when the health of the team is still a little bit up in the air. I go back to what Kaleb brought up of Alexis's start and the type of game that she ended up having, but this team collectively getting off to a great start, because in a little bit, we're going to talk about the men's team that is not getting off to great starts, and it's coming back to bite them. In games like this, and you've seen so much basketball, those types of games, I don't want to call them a trap game, but they can be very uncomfortable when you're facing a team like Northwestern with that health. How big was just the really the first quarter, but the first half of this game, and feeling a lot better about how this was going to play out?
It's a great point, Nick. And I'll tell you, Joe McEwen is a Hall of Fame coach, and you can look at Northwestern's record, but realize they've been in just about every game this year, but they were playing for something. If they defeated Nebraska and got a little bit of help, then they would make the Big Ten tournament, because not every team makes it this year. Amy Williams, I give her so much credit. At the morning shoot-around, she stood in the middle of that circle and said the most physical team will win this game. And the team took it to heart. Jessica Petrie was a monster yesterday. We can talk about Markowski's game. Logan Nisley got a ton of rebounds. Birdie Rimdahl came in and was aggressive off the bounce, hit 5 threes. So the start certainly was something. You get a team that's lower in the ratings. It's their senior day. If you let them hang around, just about anything can happen. And Nebraska turned that faucet off very quickly.
So the Huskers go ahead, and they'd already locked up a bid to, because you have to lock up a bid to the conference tournament now with the 18 teams in top 15. Huskers finished tied for 8th, and because of the tiebreakers, ultimately get the 10 seed. Matt, and we've got the bracket pulled up for those watching on YouTube right now as well. Huskers will take on Rutgers in the second game on Wednesday following Minnesota-Washington. Then Wisconsin-Iowa will be the third game that day. USC is the top seed, UCLA the 2 seed, followed by Ohio State and Maryland. For the Huskers, if they are going to make a run through this bracket, Coatney, what do they have to obviously make sure happens on Wednesday, but then potentially going forward against Illinois and UCLA?
Well, getting by Rutgers isn't going to be easy. Nebraska beat Rutgers in New Jersey, but that was tough because Kaomi McMillan put 35 on Nebraska, I think it was, that day. She's not been playing the last 5 games. She's kind of been a national story. She's been suspended. She's kind of went in the witness protection program. Also, Awas Sidibe, their good penetrating guard, has been out injured as of late. If Nebraska can get by Rutgers, they owe Illinois. That was a tough game in Champaign just a couple of weeks ago. It was a game Britt Prince got hurt in late. It was a 9-point game, but really it was a possession game until free throws were the story of the game at the end. So Nebraska's actually got a decent path to that third game, but UCLA, my goodness, they are if Nebraska plays UCLA, the Huskers will have been coming off 2 consecutive games. UCLA would have had a week break. They are coming off a loss to USC where they lost a chance at least a share of the conference title. So UCLA is going to be ready. Trust me, they are going to be ready. So if Nebraska gets to UCLA, they will have no rest in taking on one of the top teams in the nation. And, you look at that bracket, that 15-team bracket, that almost looks like an NCAA tournament.
Right.
It's like the warm-up act right now. That is a tough tournament. If you want to come out of day one, you're going to have to win 5 straight days. It's like the McCann Death March of tournament.
Well, and it's a good thing to get into, because this is now the first year we're seeing this expanded Big Ten. And I know that we've talked about in a variety of sports, whether it's football, basketball, the men's and women's side, or even the ball bat sports, of how the West Coast teams are really going to impact this conference. Even volleyball, which we saw that as well. I think it's safe to say, Co-Man, that we're looking at, between USC and UCLA, not only the teams that they have, but really the individual star power. The profile of this conference, just in this 1 year with the addition of these Western teams, these West Coast teams, has been huge for this sport. And I think a lot more eyeballs are going to be on this tournament. I mean, and that's saying, I get it. With Caitlin Clark in Iowa, there was a lot of external eyeballs outside of the conference interest on it. But even without Caitlin Clark, the individual star power and some of these great additional teams on top of the traditional teams that have been in the Big Ten, this is a huge year for the Big Ten right now.
It is. It's a great point. Juju Watkins, you can't turn on TV without seeing her trying to sell you car insurance. Lauren Betts and Kiki Rice for UCLA are major stars that come from Los Angeles. But how about the national game on Big Fox yesterday, early evening, with Maryland and Ohio State going to overtime and the dramatic shot that was hit to win the game, and then Cody McMahon giving a two-finger salute to the fans. I mean, there's so much attention right now on women's basketball. Fans, this has been a huge year, and the Big Ten is projected to get, I can't even believe this, 13 teams in the NCAA tournament. I mean, you look at Nebraska, you look at Washington, Iowa, Minnesota, they're all in the play-in round, and they're solidly in the NCAA tournament. How good is this league to say you're in the bunny bracket and you don't have to worry about being in the NCAA tournament? It's just exceptional. And then there's 3 different networks going to be covering this. Peacock will have games, then Big Ten Network takes over, then Big CBS has the championship game, which Nebraska played last year in. So, it's an unbelievable time for not only women's basketball, but this particular league.
And so much of the NCAA tournament comes down to kind of who you get matched up with. You're right, Matt. There are multiple teams that are going to be playing on Wednesday that matchup dependent can make the second weekend, Nebraska being one of them.
Absolutely. And, if Nebraska is being projected as a 10 seed, in my mind, a 7 versus 10 is the same thing as an 8 versus 9. You can move teams up a notch or down a notch with the curves and the way they slide them around. It's basically a 50-50 matchup. And this conference sets every team up for success because every night you're playing a USC, a UCLA, a Maryland, an Ohio State. You're playing one of the best teams in the nation. So it's not a stretch to say, okay, well, you have to go in and play, a team that finished second in the Big East or the ACC. It's very similar to what Nebraska has seen all year. So the conference, getting through this league, and if you can get through that, the NCAA tournament is certainly not anything that you haven't seen already.
Coach, you've seen many Amy Williams teams, and I know that relationship that you have with her and the coaching staff is always a strong one. And not every year is created equal with the injuries, with having to we just talked about Britt Prince being out for a little bit, Alexis Markowski having to leave the game with a back tweak and coming back. So not only the players that are out, but some of the players that are fighting through some pain and some nicks and here and there. What have you taken away from her leadership in this particular year, especially navigating some just devastating injuries and early on, and then what we just talked about, navigating through an even more competitive schedule?
Well, it's one of the best jobs that any coach has ever done. And one of the reasons is no one ever asked me this question. How did Amy Williams survive losing Jazz Shelley and still have the Huskers be successful this year?
Yeah.
You take a Jazz Shelley, who was really the focal part of this team, who had a great postseason last year, 3-year starter, and no one really even talks about that right now because Amy Williams has navigated the injuries and bringing in a Britt Prince, who's not the same kind of player as Jazz Shelley, but it really gets to the depth that Nebraska had at the start of the year to say, look, Allison Widener doesn't even have to start with this team. Nebraska can go 12 deep. The depth she has, the style she has, the culture she's developed here, and in working things around to make Britt Prince comfortable in playing with Alexis Markowski, it's one of her best coaching jobs, no doubt.
Well, Matt, we're looking forward to pulling that game up on Peacock on Wednesday and syncing it to the Huskers Radio Network because that's the only way that we like to take in our Husker hoops around here. So best of luck in Indianapolis and seeing that game, hoping to see the Huskers go on a run there, then hearing the name called this next Sunday for the NCAA tournament. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you for having me on.
There you go. Matt Coatney of the Huskers Radio Network, voice of Nebraska women's basketball. By the way, ESPN has Nebraska slotted in as a 10 seed headed to Baton Rouge to take on Louisville. There you go. That would be a little Danny Busboom Kelly Bowl
yes.
down down there in Baton Rouge. LSU, of course, would be the one of the other teams down there.